Let's jump into Spanish. Duerme ella. Duerme ella. Notice my voice inflection. That is very important for this specific lesson. So as you say these phrases with me, please try to mimic my voice inflection. Duerme ella. Duerme ella. Limpia él. Limpia él. ¿Cocinan ustedes? ¿Cocinan ustedes? ¿Dormimos nosotros todo el día? ¿Dormimos nosotros todo el día? Okay, I am really excited to jump into Lesson 5, where we will expand on what we learned in Lesson 4 around creating simple phrases. And in Lesson 5, we'll take those phrases and we'll convert them into simple questions. So it's really, really an exciting lesson. Another reason it's great is because I'm going to introduce you to your very first speaking practice. This is an exercise where I'll take you through a series of questions that I'll ask you in Spanish, and then you'll get to answer those in Spanish back to me. So let's get started. First, some vocabulary, followed by a review of what we've covered to this point, and then some basic steps to form basic questions, all right, with some exercise work. Then we'll expand those questions. So we'll start with the basic questions and then form some expanded questions after that, followed by a quiz, a speaking practice, and a comprehension exercise. Here's the vocabulary for this lesson. Señora, señora. Carta, carta. En un libro, en un libro. Con mi novia, con mi novia. La pizza, la pizza. El periódico, el periódico. La puerta, la puerta. En la calle, en la calle. Ventana, ventana. La alfombra. In Spanish, you would not be able to distinguish the la alfombra, okay, the space between those two words. It would just be said la alfombra, not la alfombra. It would be la alfombra. El piso, el piso. Here's some phrases. Vámonos, vámonos. Sube la escalera. These first two phrases are actual commands, so I wanted to give you some exposure to the command form early on. We're not going to get into this just yet, but it's good to have a little bit of exposure to how you conjugate verbs in the command form. So, vámonos and sube la escalera. Sube la escalera. Yo hago la comida. Remember, the H is silent, so it's not hago, it's yo hago la comida. Ellos viajan a Panamá. Ellos viajan a Panamá. Mi madre tiene mucho dinero. Mi madre tiene mucho dinero. So, you know these steps, conjugating verbs in the present tense. You're familiar with how to do that. First, you identify the subject. You drop the AR, ER, or IR ending from the verb infinitive or from the mother verb, that unconjugated version of the verb. And then you add the appropriate conjugations or endings according to who your subject is. So for AR present tense verbs, the conjugations are here on the left. For example, if tú is the subject, then AS is your conjugation. So you drop the AR from the verb infinitive and add an AS. Simple as that. Likewise, if ellas is your subject and it's an ER verb, then you would drop the ending from the verb, the AR, ER, or IR ending, and add the conjugation EN to the end of the verb. All right. And a reminder, the conjugation you choose, of course, is dictated by the subject you're using in your sentence, okay? So these two must agree. I think we've covered this 4 or 5 times already, but I can't emphasize it enough. All right, so here are the components of a sentence in Spanish. This is really exciting because we're only in lesson 5 and you're already getting these components. So first a subject, and here are the options that you have when choosing your subject. And here are the verbs. So verbs, it's subjects plus verbs. And here are some examples of verbs for you to choose. These are verb infinitives that would need to be conjugated according to the conjugation charts here at the bottom, the AR or the ER/IR conjugation charts. And finally, the last component of a sentence is the short phrase at the end. You could call that the object, but it's a short little phrase at the end that really completes the sentence. All right, so let's start to form some basic questions, okay? So we're first going to choose a subject. Just like we did when we conjugated verbs, you're choosing your subject. And then you're actually going to conjugate the verb according to that subject. So this is those 3 steps that we've talked about in conjugating verbs. Finally, you are going to do something very important. Questions in Spanish don't become a question until you have changed the position of the subject and verb. Okay, so let that sink in for a minute. When you're making a statement in Spanish, you're saying something like, ella come, or nosotros estudiamos. Okay, those are statements. But if you want to ask a question, you have to switch the placement of the subject and verb so that the verb comes before the subject. So you have to say something like those examples in jumping in, like estudia ella or come ella. Notice how my conjugated verb was placed before the subject. Come ella, estudiamos nosotros. And at that point, it will automatically trigger something in the Spanish speaker's mind that they'll think do or does. Does she study? Does she eat? Do we eat? Okay, so there is an implied do or an implied does when you switch the placement of the subject and verb when you're attempting to ask questions. That is absolutely critical to understand. And then, of course, to my point earlier in the jumping in exercise, you must add voice inflection. So your voice has to kind of go up at the end, like, does she study? Notice that? Notice how my voice kind of went up? Do we eat? Comemos nosotros? Estudia ella? All right? So that's the voice inflection that is so important. Okay, if you can get these 4 steps down, and really it's just these last 2 that are new to you. So if you can get this, you can be an expert at asking questions in Spanish. Here's an example of a statement, and then we convert it to a question. So the formula for a statement, of course, is subject, then verb. For example, say this with me, yo leo. Yo leo. It translates to I read. Now, let's convert I read into a question. In English, the question I read would become do I read? Remember that do? So do I read? The formula for a question in Spanish is verb plus subject. So the subject has to be placed after the verb. So instead of saying yo leo, which is a statement, it's affirming I read, you have to switch the placement of those two and say leo yo. Okay, notice my voice inflection. Leo yo. And that implies do. Do I read? Let's look at another example. So the statement in Spanish is ella juega, subject then verb, which translates to she plays. Now let's convert it to a question, which is the verb first and then the subject. Juega ella. Notice my voice inflection. Juega ella. Does she play? There's that do or does that's implied in Spanish. Let me show you the components of a basic question. These are easy and you already know them. The first component is a verb. The verb comes first. So verbs plus subjects equals a basic question. All right, so here are some verbs on the left. These are just a handful of verbs I chose at random. And what I would like you to do is on paper, choose 3 or 4 of these verbs and pair them with one of these subjects over here or a number of these subjects and formulate some basic questions on paper. Let me give you an example. So I'm going to select the verb viajar and the subject ella. All right. So ella is my subject. That determines how I'm going to conjugate this verb. So it's an AR verb, so I'm going to look at the AR verb conjugation chart. I'm going to drop the AR from viajar and add the correct conjugation, which is just the letter A. So my basic question now is viaja ella. Notice the voice inflection. Viaja ella. And I'm going to write that on paper. I'm also going to include the upside down question mark and the right side up question mark. And I'm just going to write that, and I'm going to do that with 3 or 4 of these verbs. So go ahead and do that now, and when you're ready, unpause the lesson and we'll proceed. Great. I hope you were able to write down a few questions and practice saying them out loud. Let's move on and build on what we've learned so far. Okay, so you know the steps to creating basic questions. First, you're going to choose a subject, conjugate the verb according to that subject, and an important part of this whole process is to switch the placement of the subject and verb and think do or does, and then add voice inflection. To form an expanded question, you're going to add a short phrase to the end of the question. Because up to this point, we've really only formulated questions using subjects and verbs. Now we're going to add a short little phrase to the end. So here is an example of a statement in Spanish. Subject, verb, plus the short phrase. And you may refer to this short phrase as the object. So subject, verb, object. Yo como la pizza. All right? Subject, verb, object. Yo como la pizza. I eat pizza. But if we wanted to make this a question, then we would switch the placement of the subject and verb. We would add some voice inflection. We would write down the question marks, and it would become como yo la pizza? Como yo la pizza? Do I eat pizza? All right, so this is really just building on what we've already covered. Let's look at one more example. Ellos compran la comida. Subject, verb, and phrase, or subject, verb, and object. They buy the food. Okay, but if we wanted to turn this into a question, do they buy the food? We have to swap the placement of the subject to verb and add voice inflection. ¿Compran ellos la comida? ¿Compran ellos la comida? All right, now I just want you to stop for a minute because you are only in lesson 5 and you are already saying complete sentences in Spanish. That is a big achievement, and I hope you can pat yourself on the back a little bit and smile and take a big, deep breath and just feel really, really good about yourself and your progress because it's not easy, but you've done a great, great thing. This is a big step, so you should feel really good about it. There's not a lot to cover here, but it's just reaffirming the formula you already know for expanded questions. So first, the verb plus the subject, and you've swapped the placement of these two for questions, finally followed by a short phrase or an object. Okay, so now on paper, I want you to do the same thing, but add the short phrase at the end. So write 3 or 4 questions using the verbs I've provided for you here, or any verb that you want. The subjects are here for you, and the short phrase. And do that for 3 or 4 of these verbs. And then when you're ready, unpause the lesson and I'll continue. Okay, I hope you were able to complete that exercise and pronounce those questions out loud. This is your first speaking practice. It's really exciting, and let me give you a few quick instructions. I'm going to ask you a question in Spanish. I will repeat that question. You'll be given a few moments to respond out loud, but if you need more time, which you probably will in the beginning, please feel free to press pause and think about or formulate your response. Then you can unpause the lesson, and I will come back in and give the correct response 2 times. All right. You should listen to my response the first time and then try to repeat or mimic with me the second time I give the correct response. Feel free again to pause the slide at any moment if you need more time to formulate or write down your response. That's really, really helpful. When you respond to questions, note that my questions to you will contain first a conjugated verb followed by a subject and a short phrase. And that follows the formula that we've talked about. But in your response to me, you're going to need to answer the question. So you're not asking a question. You are answering my question. So your response should contain a subject followed by a conjugated verb and then a short phrase that answers the question. So the key here is to remember to switch the subject and verb placement when responding to my questions. Finally, just note who your subject is. Remember that it's me asking you a question, but not necessarily about you. So I could be asking you a question about your parents. I could be asking you a question about some guy over there or a group of people over there. I could be asking you a question about me or about us. So it's really important to note who your subject is, because in your response, you're going to need to respond with the proper subject. Don't worry too much about this. You'll get really good at these over time. So let's get started. Here's the first one. ¿Comes tú la pizza? ¿Comes tú la pizza? So this is my question. You'll see the translation, and then you'll be given a few moments to respond. And if you need more time, please press pause. The answer will then be given. Sí, yo como la pizza. Sí, yo como la pizza. Yes, I eat pizza. All right, so notice here that I asked a question about you. So this question I am asking about you. Therefore, in your response, you are going to respond to the question about yourself using the subject I. Do you eat pizza? Yes, I eat pizza. Here we go. Here's the first speaking practice. ¿Come él la pizza? ¿Come él la pizza? Does he eat pizza? Okay, remember, I'm asking a question to you, but about him. Okay, somebody over there. Sí, él come la pizza. Sí, él come la pizza. Yes, he eats pizza. ¿Comes tú el chorizo? ¿Comes tú el chorizo? Do you eat sausage? So I'm asking you a question about you. Take a minute to formulate your response. If you need to pause the lesson at this moment, feel free to do so to formulate your response and think about what the right response is, and then press play when you're ready. Sí, yo como el chorizo. Sí, yo como el chorizo. Yes, I eat sausage. ¿Comen ellos las galletas? ¿Comen ellos las galletas? Do they eat cookies? Sí, ellos comen las galletas. Sí, ellos comen las galletas. Yes, they eat cookies. ¿Comemos nosotros las galletas? ¿Comemos nosotros las galletas? I'm asking a question to you about us. Okay, you're included, I'm included, and maybe we have some friends around here that are also included. So note that I'm asking you a question about us. So think about who your subject will be in your response. And the question is, do we eat cookies? Do we eat cookies? Here's the answer. Sí, nosotros comemos las galletas. Sí, nosotros comemos las galletas. Say that with me when I give the answer. Say it with me. Yes, we eat cookies. ¿Habla usted con la señora? ¿Habla usted con la señora? Do you speak with the woman? Sí, yo hablo con la señora. Sí, yo hablo con la señora. Yes, I speak with the woman. ¿Hablamos nosotros con la señora? Say the question with me. ¿Hablamos nosotros con la señora? Do we speak with the woman? Sí, nosotros hablamos con la señora. Sí, nosotros hablamos con la señora. Yes, we speak with the woman. ¿Hablas tú con la señora? ¿Hablas tú con la señora? Do you speak with the woman? Now notice, you don't really have to know what the correct conjugation is just memorized, okay? You don't have to know this in your brain because I've given you the subjects and the verb right above. So when I ask, ¿hablas tú? Do you speak with the señora? Con la señora? You don't have to know how to conjugate hablar. You can just look at the verb chart above you, along with the subject chart. And if you know who your subject is in the response, then you'll know how to conjugate the verb. So when I say, do you speak with the señora? The subject is going to be I. Okay, so here's the answer. Sí, yo hablo con la señora. And hablo is one of these options in the verb chart. Sí, yo hablo con la señora. Yes, I speak with the woman. ¿Habláis vosotros con la señora? ¿Habláis vosotros con la señora? Do you guys speak with the woman? Okay, the word you guys or the phrase you guys, I don't love it, but it does communicate a little bit of a less of a formal communication. So whenever you see vosotros, I typically conjugate that into you guys, all right? And whenever you see ustedes, it's translated into you all. Sí, nosotros hablamos con la señora. Sí, nosotros hablamos con la señora. Yes, we speak with the woman. So in this case, I was asking you a question about you and some other people that are around you. I said, do you guys speak with the woman? Okay, so there must be you and maybe some other friends around you that I'm asking the question to. So in your response, you're not only responding for yourself, you're responding for yourself plus your friends who are with you. So, si nosotros, yes, we speak with the woman. Si nosotros hablamos con la señora. ¿Escriben ellos una carta? ¿Escriben ellos una carta? Do they write a letter? Sí, ellos escriben una carta. Sí, ellos escriben una carta. Yes, they write a letter. ¿Escribo yo una carta? ¿Escribo yo una carta? Do I write a letter? Sí, tú escribes una carta. Sí, tú escribes una carta. Yes, you write a letter. ¿Escriben ustedes una carta? ¿Escriben ustedes una carta? Do you all write a letter? Here's an example of where I've used ustedes as the subject, and I translate that into you all. It's a little more formal than you guys. Sí, nosotros escribimos una carta. Sí, nosotros escribimos una carta. Yes, we write a letter. All right, so in this case, I'm asking you and your friends if you write a letter, and I'm just speaking in the formal usted. So maybe you're some colleagues of mine, or maybe you are the neighbors that I'm meeting for the very first time, so I want to treat you with an added degree of respect. ¿Escribe ella una carta? ¿Escribe ella una carta? Does she write a letter? No, ella no escribe una carta. No, ella no escribe una carta. No, she does not write a letter. Notice, you need to, in your negative responses, when no is the response, you do have to add the word no twice in a Spanish sentence. You've got to say, no, she does not. No, ella no escribe una carta. That is the end of your first speaking practice. It feels good to speak Spanish, doesn't it? And you're doing great. Here is the comprehension exercise. Go ahead and pause the lesson at this point and read through the passage on the left in Spanish, attempting to extract some of the meaning. When you're ready, press play and I'll come back in and we'll go over the English translation together. Okay, are you ready to go through it together? Let's do that. First, some questions to see if you are comprehending what is actually being said here in Spanish. Okay, so first of all, who reads books every day? Who? And are the teachers good? Let's go through the English translation together and we will answer these questions. So here it is. Los estudiantes leen, that means the students read, los libros todos los días. Los libros means books. Los estudiantes leen los libros, and then todos los días means every day. Todos means every or all. Todos los días, every day. Ellos aprenden. Ellos aprenden means they learn. Okay, highlighted here in green. Ellos aprenden de buenos maestros. They learn from great teachers. Buenos means great. Maestros means teachers. Que enseñan bien, who teach well. Que means what or who in this case. From buenos maestros que enseñan bien. And enseñan is just they teach. And bien is well. That does it for this lesson. Great job. You're speaking a lot of Spanish. Let's move on to lesson 6.